This video is brought to you by my Discord and my Blue Sky. Check the links down in the description below. Okay, I'll see if I can put that in somewhere. Hey, what's going on, you guys, and welcome back to That's a Wrap. My name is The Raptor, and on today's episode, we will be doing another Death Battle double feature review for you all, Bowser vs. Eggman, and the one after Bowser vs. Eggman. But before we get started, let's introduce who we have. First, we have a returning guest, one of our oldest mods for the server, being Ant. Although instead of Ernie the Giant Chicken, we have Christmas Goku today. How are you doing, Ant?
Doing pretty good. Merry Christmas. I'm Christmas Goku.
Yeah. Yeah, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. We are getting close to that time of year. It's scary to me how quickly Christmas just seems to sneak up on you every single year. Time is going way too fast these days. But yeah, great to have you on the show. Also on the show, we have Apex, one of our newest event managers. How are you doing?
Hey, what's up? I'm doing completely fine, and I am not being held at gunpoint by the Raptor, and I am completely in no need of help whatsoever.
Yeah, don't worry, you're only the 10th person to make that joke, so yeah. And then last on the podcast, we have Sleepy, one of our many members, one of our many thumbnail contest champions, and champion actually for a lot of different things throughout the server. How are you doing, Sleepy?
Hello. Yeah, I'm doing good. Let's talk about the episode. Whoopee.
Yeah, so for those of you guys who haven't seen this series before, this is the podcast that we do on the channel. I think it's the 7th episode that we have done. And like last episode where we talked about Omni-Man versus Bardock and Joker versus Giorno, today we're going to be talking about Bowser versus Eggman and Among Us versus Fall Guys, which is kind of going to, round out the 2024 season. Because what I am kind of, expecting this series to become is, at least partially a Death Battle review series, so at least for part of the episodes, maybe not all of them, because, it's hard to fill a whole hour just with stuff you want to say about a specific Death Battle episode, but at least for part of them, each episode is just going to come out soon after the corresponding Death Battle episode, and then we just review them, and we have a great time, However, for this year, because they were only coming out 3 weeks apart, which is pretty close together, I thought, I don't really want to do episodes, every 3 weeks for this year. So like last episode where we did 2 of them, now we're doing the other 2, and I think we're going to have a great time. I think we're going to have a lot to say about the episodes. And of course, this is just a very casual thing, we're 4 bros chilling in a VC, 5 feet apart, all that, we're really just here to have a good time, and say whatever we want to say. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say about these episodes. So yeah, are you guys ready to go?
I am more than ready.
Yes, we are.
Okay, awesome. So first of all, the one everybody wants to talk about, Bowser versus Eggman. I know at this point it's kind of old news, but people are still talking about it because of how good it was. Yeah, it was kind of good, right? It was okay.
No, it was
yeah.
versus Shadow was better.
Oh yeah, you think so?
No scratching ground, their worst episode ever.
No scratch. I mean, yeah, they would have been nice to see, but at least they got a shout out in the analyses. I did, as a Sonic fan, I definitely appreciated that. But yeah, this episode has been taking titles all over. A lot of people are into it, and rightfully so. It seemed to be on a lot of people's most wanted Death Battle list. It definitely was on mine. Like, it was my 3rd most wanted going into 2024. It was my 5th most wanted going into 2023, but of course some episodes happened that really changed that. But yeah, no, Bowser vs. Eggman has always been one of my most wanted. So, I definitely have a lot of stuff to say, but a lot of it is positive. I'm gonna be honest. But I think the thing we'll start off first is the animation, because everybody wants to talk about the animation. So I think, Ant, we'll start with you. Just general thoughts about the animation and, what was in it, the quality and all that. What do you have to say?
I'm not even gonna lie to you. The animation is easily the best hand-drawn thing I've ever seen on the show. And I've been watching since like season 1, and I remember when they first did hand-drawn animation back in season 4.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing compares to Bowser vs. Eggman in that quality.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like quality and just quantity of what was in it and the length and all of that, like, because I can't imagine I was the only person when I saw stuff like, the trailers and the teasers. I was like, okay, this is probably going to be a short animation. Like, they're probably not going to be able to fit that much stuff into it because it's hand drawn and there's so much stuff. But lo and behold, like, everything was in this animation, and it had no length problem at all. Like, I am so surprised with the level of quality and quantity that Moro was able to fit into this thing, because especially that it was primarily done by a single person. Like, that is insane to me. So yeah, absolutely, I agree with you there that it is probably the best hand-drawn thing. Just, I don't want to say objectively, because nothing's objective, but like, just when you're looking at it from various different metrics, like, yeah, it has everything, and it's insane.
I know I wish that Eggman did a little more fighting himself. But I like everything else I could just completely excuse, because I literally have nothing wrong with that animation other than just a few nitpicks that don't even affect it for me.
Apex, how about you? What did you think of the animation as a whole?
Holy crap, Moro cooked, man. Like, straight up made one of the best animations on the internet, like, ever.
You think so? Wow,
And-
that's high praise. That's great praise.
And I know there's going to be a whole lot of conversation about who the real GOAT of Death Battle was. It was Bowser Jr., it's no competition. Metal was swaggiest, but Bowser Jr. took that.
Again, just so much stuff. It's the kind of thing where you have to watch it so many times to make sure you pick up on everything that's in there. And so many things you include that they didn't really have to include, but they still decided to do it anyway. So, you know, it really shows the dedication for what they're doing. And Sleepy, you, any specific things or any general things to say about the animation?
I think I'm agreeing with every single one of you when we all say that it was absolutely incredible on every level. Like, on a production level, it's insane that, like, it's completely understandable Moro took his time to create this over the span of an entire year. And it was definitely a passion project with everyone involved, from the people who wrote the script for the episode, from the storyboards, from Moro himself animating everything.
Yeah.
And it just all came together in just like a really spectacular, really special way. I love how they like gave focus on each of the individual characters within their army.
Yeah.
And I felt like everyone was given enough spotlight to represent this whole, like, it was like a war of both sides. And I was worried that they wouldn't have enough time in order to highlight
Exactly.
Bowser and Eggman individually, but they still managed to somehow balance both of their armies interacting with each other, and still made Eggman and Bowser compatible leaders in their own right. And they also gave like incredible characterization for Bowser and Eggman during the fight. Like, you saw that Bowser was able to step up and protect his army from the big laser.
Yep.
And Eggman was, you know, he did his whole thing where he was like commanding his troops from afar, but he didn't get involved himself, and he had to rely on other people to carry him. But
they're doing what they
like,
do
there's-
best,
it's
right?
just-
Like, trying to characterize it in that way. Yeah. I think, you know, the designs of the characters and the color, the backgrounds, like, I think it all came together really perfectly. The voice actors, I think, did really great. Obviously, you have Zach Watkins for Bowser, and I believe Arthur Romero for Eggman. Both of them, I just think, you know, embodied the characters perfectly. And there were obviously a lot of individual references and, you know, and moments that, you know, really, again, embody both of the characters and embody, you know, what they are known for. And thankfully, none of that, you know, took away from the pacing of the animation. It always enhanced it, in my opinion. And yeah, I do agree. Like, I think it would have been cooler if Eggman did a little more himself. But again, I still think it's very representative of what he does best, you know, commanding people from afar. Whereas Bowser, again, like he's able to really step in there. And the whole stuff with, you know, getting disintegrated to dry Bowser, but then he puts his head back on, like, I think there's so many great moments from the animation.
I think there's like so many like little cool details. Like they had added like game sound effects.
Yeah.
For each of the characters.
Oh yeah.
Like, you remember the Goombas and the Motobug couldn't pick up the Phantom Ruby, even though they went right in front of it because they put arms. Like, that was such a huge detail.
Yeah.
Or how all the characters behind Bowser's wedding, they had like little ties and bow ties, but they were, you know.
No, definitely. The attention to detail is amazing in this. I remember especially at the very end when it's like Bowser hits Eggman into the giant mystery block that they turn the death egg into, and then like all the coins start raining down and you hear the coin sound effects and the 1-up sound effects. It's like at that point it was like like, oh my god, like these guys get it. These guys get these characters, they get the series, and I've always said that I think it is so great when people who are fans of the series get just a little bit more out of it. Like, obviously it needs to be enjoyable by anybody and everybody, but I think, you know, when you really pay homage to the right things, you know, it adds that flavor where it's like, if you're a fan, you know, you can really get a lot out of it. So I definitely think they understood the characters perfectly. They understood the series perfectly. And yeah, it's just, it's a really good mesh between the series. Definitely a better mesh between the series than really any other Mario and Sonic episode that they have done, just for the amount of work that they put into it.
There's so many hype moments too. Like Bowser surging from the ground in his Fury form.
Yep.
Or Metal Sonic lifting Bowser with his one hand as he turned into Super Neo Metal Sonic. It's just, it's so much hype. Like this entire episode was a freaking hype train.
It's hard to put into words exactly what you like about it because, like, it works on so many levels. Like, yeah, there's a lot of individual moments that are like, they're really good, but also just generally speaking, it's just fun to watch. When Kamek was bringing up the warp pipes, it's like, I didn't expect that to happen, but that's really cool, you know? Stuff like that really shows that they understand, you know, the capabilities of the characters and, you know, what makes the series what they are. But I will agree that, like, it's hard to put into words exactly why you like something like this, because in general, it's great. You know, you don't really have to pick it apart to be like, oh yeah, it's amazing because of this and this and this. It's literally just amazing.
There's not much you could say that hasn't already been said a million times before because it's just that good.
Exactly, yeah. Everyone kind of just accepts it.
I also do want to say that anything that they did miss out in the animation, Moro, in the span of a single day, animated those alternate scenarios in the conclusion, and I think that was just chef's kiss.
Yeah, for sure. That definitely transitions well into, you know, talking about the analysis and the direction and such. But for sure, like, the alternate scenarios were an amazing idea for something like this, where there are so many different factors, where you have to think about so many things, and you just can't fit everything into an animation, even if this was longer than I expected, which it was, but even still, you can't fit everything into it. But the alternate scenarios are incredible, and while I don't need to see them for every episode, for episodes like this, where there are so many things at play, like, it was just such a nice touch. They didn't have to throw that in, but the fact that they did, and we got to see, like, a little bit of, you know, Lightman or Super Eggman or whatever you want to call him, and, you know, Dreamy Bowser and Time Eater, like, that's just amazing to see, even if it is just for a second. So, yeah, I definitely would like to see more of that when they are necessary.
The editing was just, it was so good. I usually watch Death Battle mostly for the entertainment purposes rather than the debate itself. But I'll also watch the analysis and all that.
Yeah.
They went so above and beyond with the editing. It's honestly crazy to see Death Battle go this far with the animation. And, like, they covered basically everything that I expected them to cover. And for a matchup that I don't even really like, they did so much with the analysis and the editing. And I love the background music they had for all of them and the jokes as well. Like, the post-analysis as well. Like, they had, like you guys mentioned, the alternate scenarios. Yeah, I agree. They should definitely do it more for matchups that definitely could fit that. But overall, the analysis was just really fun to watch. And I saw myself going back to watching the entire episode, like, multiple times, because it was just that good and that satisfying to watch.
But you would say you're not a huge fan of, like, the Bowser versus Eggman matchup itself?
Yeah, I never really thought it was that cool because it's kind of just Mario versus Sonic, but they're enemies. But I was never against it happening because I know that it had such a good animation potential. Like, I'd prefer Eggman just having a rematch with Wile, and I prefer Bowser versus King Dedede. But the way they presented this episode, it was so good.
Yeah, and that's definitely something to bring up too, because I've said it before that, like, matchup ideas should be good on their own, and that Death Battle shouldn't have to make them good necessarily. That being said, though, I still think Bowser versus Eggman is a great matchup. Again, one of my most wanted for a while. But still, yeah, like, if you're not a huge fan of the matchup, like, that's definitely valid. But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, when they make something this good, does it really matter anymore, right? Like, you can go back and watch this episode.
There's, like, plenty of episodes that feature matchups that I don't like, but I ended up, like, really liking the episode.
Yeah, it's more so about whether or not it can work necessarily, because everyone's going to have different preferences on who should fight who. But as long as it can work as an episode, that's the main thing. Like, if it couldn't work as an episode, then it wouldn't have been this awesome. You know what I mean? So obviously they're able to take what works about it and deliver with it.
And when you get episodes this good, man, screw connections, thematics, whatever that goes into like in depth with the matchup. It doesn't matter because the episode is raw.
Well, I still like matchups with good connections and such, but I do agree that like there gets to a point where it's so good where it's like, yeah, maybe you wanted someone to fight someone else, but if a character did fight someone else, we wouldn't have gotten this episode. We wouldn't have necessarily gotten something to this level of quality. So yes, it does get to a point where you kind of just have to accept what you have. And again, for me, someone who really wanted Bowser versus Eggman in the first place, like, I don't even have that issue. So yeah, for sure.
I was a big fan of both analyses, but I especially loved Eggman's.
Okay.
The editing was top notch, and I felt like it was like a perfect analysis of the character and everything he stands for, along with his development just throughout the entire franchise, which is something I wasn't expecting. Like, Eggman is actually just such a dynamic character if you look at his entire history, and Death Battle was the only thing that really brought that attention to it.
Yeah, I do definitely agree with the editing on Eggman's part, where it's like, I do know there are some people who have like a real disdain for like comic episodes, but you have to admit, like, when we're talking about like comic panels and how they make them more dynamic in the editing, like, at this point, like, the editors are just godlike with that stuff. Like, because of course when you're using like visual content, you don't have to do that much, you know, to make it interesting to watch. But when you have just like still comic panels, you know, it might not be that interesting. But when you have stuff like the Sonic comics and they have like the displacement trap moving up and down and like the Phantom Ruby and all that, like, I think they have really mastered how to edit comic panels properly to make it fun to watch. So, you know, that's always something to look forward to with a comic episode or anything that has to do with comics at all, because they definitely know how to do that.
I agree with Apex about what he said about Eggman's analysis. It was really, really solid. I enjoyed it. I also want to talk about Bowser's analysis.
Okay.
Because the Mario franchise in general doesn't necessarily have like a chronological series of events. All games kind of have like interweaving connections with one another, but the analysis was able to like have like a miniature character arc for Bowser in the analysis, where they talked about how he was like a tyrannical king who wanted to marry Princess Peach, but then also transitioned to how he accumulated his army and then started to have a miniature family and started bonding with them. I just really enjoyed that like escalation, where they first brought up all of his feats and all the things that he's done, but also rounded it out towards the end by bringing up his army and connecting that to how Bowser has changed as a character.
See, for me, that's almost like a requirement these days. That, like, yes, the ultimate goal is to try to figure out who wins in a fight, and with that, you want to look at all the feats, you want to look at all the capabilities, but the way I see it, this is not just respect threads the series. Like, it really is a celebration of who the characters are as characters, not just what they can accomplish, but how they've grown and who they are. And thankfully, I think Death Battle does this quite well for most characters, and I think they did it well for both of them here. Like, obviously, when they start talking about Sage, they really talk about, you know, maybe the softer side that Eggman may or may not have, and then of course, yeah, with Bowser, I do think it is really impressive that, like, they show the growth of the character that's not really spelled out to you throughout the games, but you can pick up on if you've really done the research and if you really look at everything, especially when these guys have so many goddamn capabilities and people in their armies to go over. Like, I'm so impressed, and obviously part of it is because the episode was longer, but I have always said that if you need to make episodes longer, that's not a problem. Like, just do it, you know, don't sacrifice quality because you want to stick to a certain time. So obviously the fact that it was like, I think the 4th longest episode or something in the series, like, that obviously added to it. But even with that, I am so impressed that they were able to have such a great balance of you know, who the characters were, how they have changed, who they are, but also talking about the most important stuff that they have to offer in terms of capabilities. And I do think they also did a good job of making sure that the outcome wasn't obvious based on what they said. Like, they didn't give too much away in terms of their reasoning, so I'm really happy with that balance that they were able to achieve.
Yeah, for sure. They covered a lot of things that was obscure and I didn't think they would cover. But I'm so glad they went into like Dreamy Bowser and stuff, because that's like one of the coolest Bowser forms out there.
The conclusion as well. This goes back to the alternate scenarios we were talking about.
Yep.
I think it's really, really impressive that they were able to be in this, like, this in depth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this was one of the longer conclusions that we've gotten before, and I think
sure.
they broke it down very well, I think.
Yeah, really leaving no
I feel like-
stone unturned, that kind of thing.
The fact that these alternate scenarios even exist in the first place just shows how much these characters have as a whole.
Absolutely.
They knew they couldn't just reflect everything these characters had in one animation.
Mm-hmm.
They knew this alternate scenario were needed in order to properly like respect these characters' legacies, and this is like the greatest representation of how just important a character is in general.
Yeah, and like, of course, you know, they can't just leave the conclusion as like a single possibility. Like, they need to make sure that they cover as much as they can, like, for what could happen, especially when these characters have, again, the way they put it, trump cards, stuff that can end the fight basically instantly. Like, yeah, like, if you just don't talk about that stuff, people are going to get upset, and people might be thinking, well, you didn't really bring this up, so, like, what if this? So I think they did a good job of making sure that, like, oh, no, they know about this, but they still come to their own conclusion based on their own thoughts and their own merits. So I think it was a very good idea that they did not neglect much in the conclusion. They really came back to everything.
I've even, like, seen reaction videos of people who were rooting for Eggman and thinking that he would win, but by the end of the video, completely changed their perspective and then they think Bowser wins. So they did a really good job of convincing people.
Honestly, that's insane for me to hear, because one of my biggest complaints about this community is the fact that there seem to be so many people that come to their own conclusions, whether or not it's based on, you know, research that they have done. Usually it's based on research that they have heard, which is one of the most fucking annoying things. But like, the point is, the point is, like, regardless of how they got that information, most people seem to just be unwilling to change their minds no matter what, like, under any circumstances. And if Death Battle disagrees with them, then at least they won't change their opinion, and at most they'll say Death Battle is stupid and wrong. So the fact that you're even saying that, and sure, maybe these aren't people from the Versus community, because again, it's mostly just people from the Versus community I see doing that, but even still, the fact that I'm even hearing this at all, that Death Battle is actually, like, people are listening to what they have to say, and they recognize that, hey, maybe Death Battle knows something that I don't, that's amazing. I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The Versus community in general does somewhat have a negative reputation in a sense.
Yeah.
But because this episode's reception was so positive, all of these people's positive feelings towards the episode are just exacerbated even more. And I didn't hear that many, like, complaints this time, as I think.
That is fair to say, because I know some people personally where if they disagree with the outcome of an episode, then they will hate it. It doesn't matter, like, all the other prospects, all the other work that went into an animation, or whatever it is, the editing, all the production elements, even the stuff you don't even really think about, but the stuff they definitely have to do. Like, there are some people where if they don't like the reasoning, or if they just don't agree with the conclusion, they will hate the episode, and that's it. And that's always kind of annoyed me, because it's like, even if you disagree with it, an episode is still worth appreciating for all the hard work that they do. And thankfully, this episode was so good that I have not seen that at all, or at least I have very barely seen that. For once, people are actually able to look at how good an episode is and say, you know what, it doesn't matter, this was awesome. And that's so great.
I've seen, like, the Sonic community and the Mario community, like, band together.
Exactly.
Like, they were just like, dude, Metal Sonic was so freaking cool. No, Bowser Jr. was, like, so awesome. Like, I didn't like Bowser Jr. that much before, but Bowser Jr. really carried this fight. I love him now.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen, it just brought the community together. Not just the Death Battle community, but both, like the series, Mario and Sonic.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And there's plenty of episodes where my preferred character has lost and I don't agree with it, but I still like the episode. Like Bardock versus Omni-Man is a recent example. Me personally, I'm salty that Bardock lost, but it was still a really good episode in my opinion. And they portrayed both characters really well. And I see people always hating on this episode just because they got it quote unquote wrong. And I think that's just so stupid.
See, exactly. Like that seems to be the textbook definition of like how people will react to a matchup, or at least how people in this community will react to it. Like, are you seriously not going to appreciate all the hard work they put into this? And of course, you know, I'm not trying to gatekeep here. I'm not trying to say like you have to love Death Battle no matter what they do, but to completely write off all the hard work just because of a simple disagreement, a subjective disagreement, may I remind you, I just think that's a little shallow, to be perfectly honest, but that's just me.
I do appreciate like constructive criticism.
Oh, of course.
Like criticism that isn't like born out of spite, but criticism that's genuinely out of love and wanting to improve the show.
You do still want the show to get better, and if there are things that you can say that you think might make the show better, then it's good to express those opinions. But that's exactly it, right? Death Battle has been getting better. Death Battle is clearly listening to what people are saying,
for sure.
and they're making sure that they can improve, they can stay on this upward trajectory. So when I see people basically saying that they have like no faith in Death Battle for like representing this character well, I'm like, well, why not? Like they really have been getting better. But we've talked enough about like the general production. I'm really glad with all the stuff that we have said. I do want to talk about the verdict, just because I don't want to, even if we do all agree with it, I don't know if we do, but I don't want to neglect it just in case, you know, someone has something they want to say about it. So in terms of like the general conclusion, like the verdict and the reasoning, Ant, do you have anything positive or negative to say about that?
Honestly, nothing but positive, because I 100% agree that Bowser definitely takes it, whether you include all material or not. Like I said, they went over pretty much everything that I expected them to go over, which is why I think Bowser would win, because, you know, he has like his dreamy form and stuff. He just completely outstats Eggman, has a slightly superior army because of his trump cards. But in terms of like what they covered, I think they did a great job. Whether you agree with it or not, they definitely went over everything that they could, in my opinion.
As far as covering things, and again, making sure they leave no stone unturned, like it definitely very appreciative that they were able to do that. Apex, you?
I feel like the best way to describe how this debate goes is Eggman had 1,000 win cons and Bowser had 1,001.
I would agree with that.
It's just one of the most debatable matchups ever with either one. It could go either way, but Bowser just slightly takes it with just a couple stat boosts, you know?
You can see that in the reasoning too, where it's like, again, they both have multiple trump cards, and they're talking about like the smallest differences in the analysis. Like usually you wouldn't hear them say, oh, well, Bowser's army likes Bowser and Eggman's doesn't necessarily, so that means Bowser wins. Like usually you wouldn't hear something as trivial as that, you know, in a conclusion, but here it actually does matter because it's the small differences and it actually plays into how the characters make up for each other's weaknesses, and they really are a unit together, and, you know, more so than Eggman's army, I would argue. So I do think small things like that, I think it matters. Sleepy, how about you?
I saw this really cool comment that somebody made about it. Eggman has an army because he needs them, but Bowser has an army because they need him. I think that's the best way to like put it, because Bowser's loyalty and all of his troops, they all make up for each other's weaknesses, and they were able to pull through in the end. Not to say that Eggman doesn't have, but like he has Metal Sonic and he has Sage. But Eggman overall, his army is just like more encompassing. About the debate side though, there was a lot of debating before this episode even came out. I've seen, particularly on the Death Battle subreddit, I believe, or in like Discord or like the community overall,
everywhere.
right?
It'll be everywhere, right? Yeah.
Everywhere. I've seen so many propaganda posts of saying that Eggman wins because of this, and he has counters to everything that Bowser has. That Bowser has everything like this, and then I've seen like so many people go back and forth and back and forth. It was just like accumulating to the hype for this episode to see how it turned out. And then when it finally came out, it was like all the puzzle pieces of everything as everyone said coming together, and then it's like, oh, this makes sense. Because I was actually debating with my friends for weeks, and then like finally seeing all these little like factors into Death Battle coming together.
Were you going into it thinking a specific character would win?
I actually thought Eggman was going to win.
Oh, okay.
I didn't think seeing all these different factors that I've seen the community and my friends talk about, and then Death Battle putting it into words and then explaining how Bowser wins. It was like very satisfying in a way.
Yeah, I obviously went into this thinking that Bowser was going to win. But of course, as time went on, it's like, well, is he? It's hard to say. And even making my prediction, I knew very well that, Eggman has a lot of win cons. He could very easily win the fight. But as I've said before, having win cons does not mean that you win. People can have win cons, but it depends on what win cons are more likely or who has more of them, etc. It's really easy to latch onto your favorite character in a debate like this because you can just latch onto the win cons that they have. And of course, I was trying to avoid that because I love Sonic the Hedgehog as a franchise, but I love Bowser very specifically. So I'm like, okay, I have to try to make sure that my biases are not getting in the way of this. I just thought that Bowser's army and just his general amount of win cons seemed a little better. But of course, if Death Battle did argue for Eggman instead, it's like I could see very well how they would do that. And also, kind of tying into that, Death Battle started doing more of like a checklist style of conclusion where they talk about like the categories that are most representative of a fight. And before, if you were to tell me that they were going to be doing this, I would not have liked that because I've said before that a checklist style conclusion kind of ignores other things like the degree of those advantages, or, just because a character has 3 advantages and another character has 2 doesn't mean the character with 3 definitely wins, because there might be more to it than that, or the character with the 2 advantages might have like really big advantages, that the other character doesn't, etc. But I think Death Battle actually does it really well now in this case because, again, one, they choose categories that are representative of the matchup that they're looking at, which I think is really important. But even aside from that, it doesn't seem like that's actually changing how they come to conclusions. Like, they're just using it as a way to, again, make the conclusion easy to understand for people watching. Like, they come to the conclusion first, and then they split things into categories that make it easy to understand.
Going back to the community debates part of this conversation, I remember during the waiting period for Bowser versus Eggman in this server, the Raptorverse, there were actually 2 people, don't want to say their names, but were actually debating the matchup for 6 days straight and still brought in new content like every day. It's nuts.
Yeah. Because that's the kind of debate that this is. Like, it's not just Bowser versus Eggman, it is their armies, and a lot of stuff that is very representative of Mario and Sonic. Like, because again, we're even looking at Mario power-ups here. We're looking at the Chaos Emeralds and so many villains in general that Sonic has fought. Like, this really is the Mario versus Sonic matchup, aside from Mario versus Sonic itself. Like, it's crazy how much that is representative of these series is naturally integrated into here. And of course, Death Battle might have been bending the rules a little bit. Like, they even said it themselves that they would be including some stuff that might be considered non-standard or one-time uses. But at the end of the day, I don't really give a shit for a fight like this because it naturally works when you already have so much stuff. Yeah. So that's totally fine with me. And again, the conclusion is always going to come down to the small stuff with something like this. You cannot convince me that this is one-sided one way or the other. Ultimately, I do agree with the outcome. I'm fine if people disagree, but I have no issue with their distinctions, like, saying that, Bowser's army has better teamwork. Again, there might be some Eggman fans who might not like that, saying like, well, there are times where Eggman's a competent leader, but again, it really is these small differences that make it up. So I'm very happy with that.
I think Bowser vs. Eggman has not only had the best waiting period for an episode, but also the best aftermath period for an episode. Because even before this episode came out, there was this artist that was making fan art for Bowser vs. Eggman like every other day up until the release of the episode. It was like so cool. He made so much cool artwork. And I even got to participate in a collage where you get to draw different characters from Bowser's army and different characters from Eggman's army, and then we put all of our drawings together and then made a really, really cool artwork.
Who did you
It
draw?
was just like, oh, I drew Bowser.
Oh,
I
wow.
drew
Okay,
Castle Bowser.
great.
And then when the episode came out, it was like an even bigger avalanche from the community, because there was so many, there was like everything. There was like memes, there was fanfics, there was fan art.
It overshadowed both the ending of Joker versus Giorno and the beginning of Among Us versus Fall Guys, which is not something that you normally see, that like an episode is able to simultaneously hog the attention from like 2 other episodes, but somehow this one did.
Yeah. Like, they got Thwomp. the word Thwomp trending on Twitter. That's insane. People were coming together and then making this really, really cute, wholesome artwork of like Sage joining Bowser's army, and then like she's trying to bring Eggman back, and they were making their own fan-made aftermaths to the episode. And people were making fanfics of like Sage's journey to bring back her father, and then like she befriends Bowser Jr. and like it was like really wholesome and cute, and it was like,
yeah, it really is a phenomenon.
I think people just really like the idea of Mario characters interacting with Sonic characters, and especially Bowser and Eggman, because these are such influential characters within the video game landscape. I really like people focusing on the crossover aspect of what would it be like for these characters to interact with each other if they were in the same universe.
Yeah.
And so many people had their different interpretations on how all this went down. It's just like, it was really nice. And there was so many like memes that came off of it too, with Infinite getting crushed by Thwomp. That I didn't
Do we
like,
feel bad for
people-
Infinite? Because I don't.
No,
we do not.
Infinite is one of my
That was
favorite Sonic
hilarious.
villains of all time, and then just seeing him just get one shot by a Thwomp kind of hurt. not
Well,
gonna
because
lie.
at first when he came out so early in the animation, I'm like, wait a second, this isn't right, because he's gonna have to be taken out quickly in order for like the progression to keep up, because otherwise there's gonna be a lot of focus on him. And then the Thwomp came down, it's like, oh, Infinite's gravity manipulation screwed himself over. That's actually pretty funny. And I've said, you know, over and over again that, you know, I don't have a favorite episode of Death Battle. I know I have technically said, I think I said Goku Black versus Reverse Flash was my favorite episode in like the Kickstarter video that Death Battle asked me to make, but that's just because part of that was because they wanted me to say what my favorite episode was, so I just had to choose one. But ultimately, I do not have a favorite episode, but I do have episodes like Goku Black versus Reverse Flash, Scooby-Doo versus Courage, Goku versus Superman 3, etc. And those are just even more recent examples that are definitely in my top tier of Death Battle episodes. Bowser vs. Eggman is easily in that top tier now. Again, I don't want to say it's my favorite, because if I do commit to a favorite, I'm going to want to retract that later, but like, I am very comfortable saying that Bowser vs. Eggman is among that top tier for me. And I do believe there is some recency bias for people saying like, oh, it's the best episode ever, because it seems like every time a very good new episode comes out, it's like, oh, it's the best episode ever. But I am still really happy that so many people liked it. And that, you know, we got to this level of production, this very amazing treatment, because like I said, I've wanted to see this for so long, and the fact that we got something like this out of it is incredible. It really is incredible. And like I said before, I'm glad people, you know, even if they don't agree with the outcome, they can still appreciate it for what it is, you know, unlike a lot of other episodes that come out.
I do want to say that personally, this is my favorite Death Battle of all time.
Okay, great.
Not just because of the episode itself, but all with the fond memories that I've made. Like, this is the most fun I've had in this community. It made me remember why I love Death Battle, why I love these characters. It not only put into perspective what I love about Death Battle as a show, but also what I love about Mario and Sonic as series.
Death Battle's really good at, you know, sparking interest in different series, especially when they're really represented well. Like, I can think of many episodes. Like, I think Dante versus Bayonetta is a good example. Like, Devil May Cry is awesome, and I wouldn't have known that if it wasn't for that episode, regardless of how well it was made. Thankfully, you know, the animation is still amazing. So yeah, so many different examples like that. And if there's one more thing I want to bring up about this episode, it's just I think the track is basically perfect. I think it has a perfect name. Some people might think that the name is like kind of bland, but I think Game Over is so, again, so representative of the fact that no matter what you want to say about the characters, they are the final bosses of gaming. So just calling it Game Over, I think, is perfect. And the marketing also, with all the shorts with all the individual characters like Kamek and Sage, Bowser Jr., Metal Sonic, those were all great as well, because that's something very similar to what they did for Eggman versus Wile way back in the day. So to go back to their roots with that was really cool.
Oh, definitely. And I gotta agree with the song track. I kid you not. For like the next 2 weeks after the episode, I just had it on repeat nonstop. It was so good.
I kind of had that with Solid State Invincible. I'm still listening to that when I'm doing like really mundane work at like my day job. Sometimes if I just need to like concentrate for a second, I'll literally just put on Solid State Invincible because it really gets me in like the hard-working mood, I guess. But yeah, but for sure, Game Over, both Game Over and Solid State Invincible are major triumphs. But I think we have spoken enough about Bowser vs. Eggman. We have talked for a long time about that. We still have a whole other episode to talk about. Among Us versus Fall Guys. This one was obviously the first champion poll episode that happened without, it winning the champion poll. So, and obviously the next episode, Kratos versus Asura, will be the next one, because it was on both the champion poll and the Tournament of Champions. But I'm gonna be honest, this was probably, like, as far as the 2D options go, it was probably the one like at the bottom of my list for what I was most excited for. Not that like I didn't want to see it, but the other options just seemed more interesting to me. But nonetheless, this is the one we got, and it definitely is something. So Ant, we'll start with you, starting with the animation. What'd you think of the fight between Among Us and Fall Guys?
It was awesome. It was so fun to watch. Like, I know the beginning, like I'd say the first half, it was kind of white noise, which I get. But the second half of the fight, it really picks up. But that's the thing. I feel like this episode was meant to just be dumb fun and not meant to be taken that seriously. Like, we really just came from Bowser versus Eggman, where it's like a very complex debate. And then this is Among Us versus Fall Guys. Like, I never thought it was meant to be taken seriously. And that's honestly why I really love this matchup, because it was just a lot of dumb fun, in my opinion.
Yeah, dumb fun is a really good way to describe it. Just going crazy with what, the characters are about and what, they really have at their disposal. I definitely agree with that. Apex, how about you? What'd you think of the fight?
This was by far one of the goofiest and memeiest episodes of the series. Like, every 5 seconds there was a reference to some sort of meme. I genuinely am more at a loss for words with this one than I am with Bowser vs. Eggman, just because this is like, there's no future where I could have explained to my past self that this actually happened,
Right. So you think that like the Bowser vs. Eggman outcome was more plausible than the outcome we got out of this, like the resulting episode?
Yes, I do, because it just sounds like a complete like joke or something you would do to like make something up. Like it's just unbelievable that something like this actually happened, and I'm so glad it did.
Okay, great. Yeah, even if you weren't, anticipating it much or anything, if it's able to entertain you, even in spite of that, like, yeah, that's awesome. Sleepy, how about you?
The way that I saw this episode going into it, if Bowser vs. Eggman was the main course, like it was this huge meal, then Fall Guys vs. Among Us was the beautiful dessert that came after all of this.
I think that's a good way to put it. I can agree with that. I think that's a good way to put it.
This episode was just kind of dumb fun. It was like very sweet, entertaining. After the heavy dose that Bowser vs. Eggman had, going into something that was just plain old fun was like the best choice that they could have ever made. As for the fight itself, I love how they started off with the Fall Guys and the Among Us imposters, or the crewmates, all in the same spaceship, and they did the Among Us section, and then they transitioned to Fall Guys section, and then they did all the obstacle courses and the challenges that the Fall Guys had to face, and it was fun seeing how the crewmates interacted with like the Fall Guys environment. And then they went into the second half of the fight, where everything just went off of the rails all the different references that each of these beings have. It was just like really, really fun and really funny. It made me crack up a lot of times.
Yeah, I'd say the funniest part to me was just when the imposter tried to stab the Fall Guy over and over, and then he's like, wait, does this knife work? And he stabs his own hand. That to me is one of the funniest things I've seen in a death battle episode.
That made me laugh so much.
Yeah, because it's like it's so in character. It works. I do think the animation, first and foremost, was meant to be funny, but also was meant to be fun. And I could probably say that about the whole episode. Like those are the two main goals of the episode. And I saw a lot of people saying like, we just got Bowser versus Eggman and it was amazing, and now we're getting this crap, like, are you kidding me? And I'm like, well, I think honestly this could work, because again, like what Sleepy said, it's like it's kind of like a good palate cleanser. I never thought I would call Among Us versus Fall Guys a palate cleanser, but like in a way it kind of is, because it kind of like it's more of a dessert. It does kind of work that way, that after the insanity that was Bowser versus Eggman, we get more of a laid-back insanity, you know? So I was happy to see that, but I also think that Death Battle sometimes does the best stuff with the weirdest stuff, you know? And not to say that this was like the best they could have done with this episode. I don't think, you know, this is the best hand-drawn fight they've ever done or anything. Like, not like the things I could probably say about Bowser versus Eggman, but I still think it was very impressive for the fact that it was largely hand-drawn and that it was very faithful to what makes the series fun to talk about. This is definitely an example of the people who like the series will get a little bit more out of it because of how many references they put in, all the memes, and somehow that did not detract from the quality of the animation. And I do agree with Ant in that, you know, it kind of did start a little slow, but I do think that works in its favor in a way because, again, they started on the spaceship and then they got ejected into the Fall Guys stadium. And then it's like, after they get all that out of the way, it's like, okay, now we start the fight. The imposter versus the Fall Guys winner. And yeah, it does kind of make it look a little worse by comparison when you compare everything that happens later in the animation. But I still think it's good that they made sure to be like, okay, we got to get a spaceship scene. We got to get a Fall Guys stadium scene.
Yeah, my only gripe was just, I feel like the Fall Guys section where they were like going through the obstacles, I felt like that dragged on a little too long. Like nothing really happens until like the later half of the fight. That's when they really start getting into it. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I thought it was pretty fun.
One thing I do think that is really funny is that this episode was by far way more gory than Bowser versus Eggman, which didn't even have didn't have any gore whatsoever. Mm-hmm. It wasn't as brutal. Arguably, this is more of a brutal fight than Bardock versus Omni-Man, which has an Invincible character, which is crazy.
Death Battle is good at paying respect to characters when it comes to the analyses, but also their deaths. However, I will admit there is a part of me that misses when Death Battle was all about, you know, bloody murder. Like, I do still think that is part of what makes Death Battle, when they have, like, a lot of blood or whatever, because that's just something that you don't see everywhere, right? And I think that does really make Death Battle what it is at specific times. So I'm happy that when it is still thematically appropriate, they are keeping blood in the series. Like, again, with an Invincible character, you need blood. That's why, even though I don't love the specific kill shot of Omni-Man versus Bardock, where it's like, oh, he gets his arm exploded and then just dies, basically. Like, even though I don't necessarily love that, I do love that there was a lot of blood there, because there should have been. And with Among Us versus Fall Guys, where you have Among Us characters dying and you do see some blood, it's like, yeah, they just play that up a little bit. That is surprisingly representative of Among Us. So I'm really happy that, you know, when it is necessary, when it is thematically appropriate, they are still keeping that aspect of the series alive, because it is still something that I like about it.
I love all the still frames of how Fall Guys was imagining the imposter and then you just have a montage of all those like funny images with all those memes and stuff. That was really cute. That was funny.
Right, because it's like it really plays into the Fall Guy being like, no, I must win. Like, yeah, that's just cute. It's funny. And also the fact that they included all the stuff that they did, like there was the banana bomb, there was the pencil that drew the imposter's sword, and there was the He-Man sword, and even the TARDIS and Pac-Man make like very brief appearances, but it's cool, you know? Like, it's great that they were able to put all of those references in, and again, none of this detracts from the animation. So it's great to see all that hard work and making sure they know how to balance everything.
This is probably gonna be an unpopular opinion and probably a shock to some of you guys, but I honestly think the analysis was way more fun to watch than any episode we've gotten this year. It's just dumb fun, you know. That's what this whole matchup is about. And I love this scene where they're like, the research team are just fucking crewmates, and they're just like voting each other out, figuring out who the imposter is. That was just so funny to me.
Yeah, and also having like the little icons like the boomstick and Whiz Beans just like walking around the Among Us spaceship. Like, that's always great to see when they put in that little extra effort. And I think part of it is also because for an episode like this, sometimes getting like the background visuals or just the visuals in general might be a little tougher. Like, it was clear they needed to get a little creative with how they got all the visuals that they did. But I think they handled that in the best ways too. I think they made sure that it was still fun to watch.
I love the background music they had for the analysis too, especially for the Among Us part.
This has been one of the most fun analyses since like Jason versus Michael Myers. It just so unique, brings a lot of elements from both series, and they just have a lot more fun with it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I still find it hilarious that they brought in Twitter feeds for the Fall Guys. Like,
well, again, it's kind of like the fact that they're looking at all the crossover elements, the fact that they're looking at anything and everything that these characters are involved with. It's kind of like Bowser versus Eggman, where it's like, okay, maybe that's not exactly how they normally do things. But it was the kind of thing where it's like, there's no way they're not going to try to pull everything because it's just too spicy. It's too fun to look at, like, what did they do on Twitter? What did they do in fucking Fortnite? Like, all that stuff. So, yeah, it made sense to me that they're just going to go crazy with it. And of course, I had my own opinions about how things were going to go based on all of that, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, it was great to see the integration of all of that stuff.
While the episode didn't particularly have my personal brand of humor, I still did find myself laughing at a couple jokes. And I also really like how, like, these are just a couple little weird bean guys, but then they play it into how creepy their anatomy is.
Yeah, the biology,
And then
yeah.
the biology. And then they brought in these, like, cosmic feats where you saw the crewmate was able to whip out a gun that was able to obliterate planets, and they said it was able to destroy the Earth like 1,000 times over. Or how they said that the Fall Guys was able to stretch across the entire observable universe. Like, you wouldn't assume that. Like, the casual audience wouldn't know that about these characters. But then they bring up these insane, ludicrous cosmic feats for these characters, and it's like, wait, he's able to survive a Big Bang? He's able to survive getting hit by a meteor from outer space?
Yeah, another goal of the episode is definitely to hammer home the absurdity of what these characters can actually do. Because I saw a lot of people saying, well, hang on, how does this actually work as a fight? And I'm thinking, oh, it works as a fight. You just gotta look at everything. You gotta, translate all of that stuff to combat. And naturally, Among Us is slightly more combat oriented than Fall Guys, but that doesn't mean that Fall Guys doesn't have access to stuff that can be very easily applicable to combat, like the He-Man sword and the TARDIS and all the costumes they have, So I think they did a good job of making sure that was easy enough to understand, easy enough to incorporate. And yeah, again, very funny talking about the characters' biologies and their natural personalities, because they are very similar yet very different species. So to see that interact was obviously a lot of fun. And if there's one main praise I can give this episode, is that it feels exactly like what Among Us and Fall Guys coming together should feel like. Like, even if you weren't really a big fan of the matchup itself, you got to admit this feels like the most amazing interaction between these series that you could see, at least as far as, the animation and comparing them together in the analyses. So I was happy to see that. Again, it feels like they really understood the characters, and they took this matchup seriously while still making it a fun episode, Like, I think that's super important.
Kind of reminds me of, SpongeBob, right? Where versus debating and calculations are meant to be taken literally, but when you apply that lens onto characters that virtually don't make any sense, it kind of just exacerbates everything and blows everything out of proportion. Like, I'm sure that nobody really thought about, SpongeBob unraveling the universe, or how many nanoseconds it took for him to do that. But when you calculate that, You just get these insane numbers, and I just think that's like extremely comedic.
Yeah, that's one of the big things you got to make sure you're doing, like really playing to the strengths of the characters that you're using. For some cartoon characters, that ultimately means, you know, leaning into the absurdity, and that does overlap with this matchup a lot. And this kind of ties in more to the general community you know, outlook of this matchup and other matchups like it. But I think people who dismiss matchups or episodes just because they're sillier is, you know, I don't really think you should do that. I think you should look at an episode for its merits. Just because it's weirder does not mean that it's worse. And if it does what it's trying to do well, then what's the problem, you know? Because I know there are some people who really don't like specific episodes just because it's different or just because they're sillier. And it's like, dude, we get enough serious episodes enough. Like, we can take a silly episode. It does not ruin the series. And especially when it's as good as it is. Not to say Among Us versus Fall Guys is the best thing they've ever done. I don't think it is, but even like just in a vacuum, it is still a very well produced episode, and it still utilizes what it has very well. So just because it's weirder, you're gonna write all of that off? Like, come on, like don't do that.
Yeah, and like one of my favorite episodes of all time is a joke matchup, and I love it when they do goofy matchups like this.
As long as it's not too frequent. But yeah, like if they can do it well, then why not, you know? Okay, now let's talk about the outcome. So again, we talked about the analyses and what we liked about them, but in terms of the outcome, the verdict, the reasoning, I don't know if anyone has any strong opinions on this, but I guess we'll go around. Ant, any specific things that you agree or disagree with for the outcome? Any strong opinions like that?
This is probably the category I'm gonna have the least to say about, because I mean, I definitely agree with it, especially as soon as they mentioned the fucking Big Bang, and then brought in Fortnite into this. I knew for a fact that Fall Guys was gonna win. Didn't even try to argue against that. I knew the moment this matchup was announced, they were gonna win. I just think I didn't think they would go that far into the reason. though. I'm 100% glad they did. It was funny, but in terms of whether or not I agree with the outcome or not, I agree with this 100%.
I heard that apparently the Big Bang, because I don't watch the previews because that ruins my reaction videos to a degree, but I heard that in the preview the Big Bang feat was mentioned. So if that's true, then it's like, well, really? Like, they brought up like this huge deciding factor like before the episode even came out? That's a little weird.
Did that.
Wow.
It was funny.
Okay, well, I mean, like, they can do whatever they want to do. I guess they just wanted it to be that early in the analyses, which I can't really fault them for necessarily. But yeah, I agree with that. It's like once you hear that, especially after you go over the entirety of the Among Us section and you don't have anything that's at that level, then you would think, well, GG's. But I guess they wanted to bring it up early anyway. Okay, yeah, just interesting to hear. Apex, any opinions on the verdict, conclusion, anything?
While I don't necessarily have like a major take on the verdict, I just find it funny that when the episode was first announced, most of the community was just saying Among Us is going to stomp this. It's not even close. And then the second people started putting like analysis into it, started debating over it, literally just the entire community immediately shifted over to the Fall Guys, like changed their mind before the episode even came out, before any of the previews came out. It was hilarious.
Right after I made my prediction, I made a poll which was like, who are you rooting for? Who are you betting on? Among Us, Fall Guys, or whatever? And over half of the entire poll voted rooting and betting Among Us. And this was after I did my prediction where I was fairly confident the Fall Guys were gonna win, and thankfully they did, because then I was quite confident in that prediction, so thankfully they did. But I was a little worried. I'm like, wait, what the hell am I missing? Why are so many people saying, yes, Among Us is definitely going to win? And then the episode came out and it was like, okay, the Fall Guys won. But it kind of scared me for a second, because whenever that happens, it's like, well, I'm only one guy. What did I miss? What does everyone else know that I don't? And thankfully, apparently not much. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, I guess if there's anything I can say about that, like I said, I predicted Fall Guys because I thought they're probably going to include more stuff, and a lot of it can also be determined on how literally you take things. Like, you could technically say, oh, well, it's a game show, so how real is this stuff that's happening? Or, yeah, you see the TARDIS, you see Thor's hammer, you see all this stuff, but, like, is it real? Is it the literal TARDIS that you see in Doctor Who? Is it the literal Thor's hammer that you see in Marvel? Obviously, Death Battle took a more literal route, which I expected them to, because they tend to do that nowadays. In terms of, like, any kind of difference or major difference that they make in terms of how they analyze things, usually it's whether or not they take things literally, and usually it's that they take things more literally. I cite Final Fantasy for this very specifically, because back then when they weren't taking things as literally, Final Fantasy characters were never able to win. And then when they got to like Season 4 for Sephiroth versus Virgil and Season 8 with Link versus Cloud 2, they started taking things a bit more literally. But anyway, yeah, so that's kind of just why I anticipated that to happen. And yeah, it makes enough sense to me. Again, with the whole like checklist style conclusion, I think limiting it to like 3 was fair, because those categories are really all you need. And I found it quite obvious that, yeah, Among Us, like, they have more firepower, but it's kind of like with Rick versus the Doctor, where it's like Rick has more weapons, but the Doctor has way better technology. It's like, it kind of just felt the same here, where it's like, yeah, the Among Us has like more deadly weapons, but in terms of the actual arsenals that, you know, Fall Guys have access to, then yeah, it's too much.
I think one of the funniest things is how they used the Fall Guys being able to turn into Pac-Man as a counter for the ghosts is by far one of the funniest debate points they've ever had on the show.
That's not even something I was thinking about, like, in my prediction. I think I brought up, like, the Ghostbusters Proton Pack, and I was trying to imply that that's a way that they could take out the ghosts, which is definitely still viable, I think, but I guess Pac-Man is just a funnier angle to go with, so it makes sense that they went that route.
Was this the first matchup that included crossover scaling?
It might have been. Again, in terms of like Fortnite, I don't think they've ever leaned into Fortnite scaling before. I think it kind of depends on like how official it is, or like how consistent it is maybe, but I think this feels like the main one where it's like consistency is thrown out the window. And that's kind of, that is probably like my biggest gripe with this episode, where they could have brought up more durability feats that the Fall Guys had that would have been enough to withstand the Among Us characters' weaponry. Like, there's a feat, like, in Fall Guys where they survive, like, just being sucked into a huge black hole, you know? So, unless I'm getting calculations wrong, I feel like that would also be enough to, you know, survive the weaponry that the Among Us crewmates and Imposter have. But you also then think, like, they only brought up the Big Bang from Fortnite, and I'm thinking, well, if you have other durability feats that aren't from Fortnite, maybe you should bring those up too.
I thought the black hole was the Big Bang. Like, I thought it was a black hole that created the Big Bang, which is what the Fall Guys survived.
Is it the same thing? I thought they came from different places. Maybe I'm getting that wrong, but I could have sworn the black hole was from the Fall Guys game and the Big Bang was from Fortnite, but maybe I'm getting that wrong. Maybe they're actually the same thing.
I could be wrong.
Pretty sure they were two different feats.
Okay, well, regardless, like, I do believe there were other durability feats they could, and of course they did bring up, you know, surviving lava and being hit by like a small meteor and all that. But if they in truth had feats that could withstand the Among Us characters' weaponry, I would have liked them to talk about them and not just the one feat they have from Fortnite, because if someone watches that, then it might be like, oh, well, what, Fortnite is the only reason why they won? That's stupid. Like, it's all about trying to get the point across in the most concise way, and I feel like maybe they could have talked more about the survivability of the Fall Guys if they in truth had durability feats that didn't just come from outside sources. You know what I mean?
If I remember correctly, the gun that Among Us guy was able to use, that also came from the crossover as well.
Yes, consistency was kind of thrown out the window. They just wanted to talk about what the characters are able to do wherever we see them, and that's fine. Again, for something like this, you can lean into the ridiculousness. I think it just makes the episode better.
What I think is really funny is that using this logic, the Fall Guys speed blitz both Bardock and Omni-Man. You can make a solid argument that they would destroy Bardock and Omni-Man.
Yeah, I did appreciate how Death Battle was, you know, taking some leniency with some feats, but also saying that, you know, some might be more of a stretch than others, like the speed of them, you know, stretching in the time that they did. But even still, you know, it's still nice that they talked about it, nice that they calculated it, if you want to lean into that stuff. Again, I don't really think they needed it. They didn't talk about speed that much, but it didn't really seem like a huge factor to me in the first place. Again, it really is the fact that the offense of the Among Us characters really cannot get past the defense. But it's, again, also just all the craziness that Fall Guys has in the game. It's like, well, how do you beat that, you know? So I'm happy I was able to put that together in my prediction, but again, even still, it's nice to hear it. Hear Death Battle put it in the most concise way, the most concise and clear way that they can put it. So yeah, happy to see that.
I think one thing that did somewhat convince Death Battle crew to do this episode, I could be wrong, but wasn't there this animator that was pushing for this episode for the longest time while it was on the
champion poll? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was animating, he was advocating for this episode, and then he got the opportunity to work on the episode. I'm so sorry, I don't remember his name. I should probably...
I think it's Larry and Wood, I think.
Yeah, Larry and Wood.
Yeah, no, that is awesome. Something getting a Death Battle cast episode is obviously a good way to, like, test the waters, see, does it work as an episode or would it not be able to work? So yeah, I think it getting a Death Battle cast episode and it getting that little animation definitely helped its chances. Again, as far as champion poll matchups go, even across both the 2D and the 3D options, it was probably like in my bottom tier of like, what would I be excited to see? But again, like I have nothing to complain about. Like it was a fun episode. Not as good as Bowser versus Eggman. Certainly not my favorite, you know, for the last, you know, year or 2 years or anything. But like, you can still look at something as a vacuum. Not everything needs to be compared to each other. Just because it wasn't as good as Bowser versus Eggman doesn't mean that it needs to be looked at badly, you know? So I'm still happy for what we got.
Comparing it to Bowser versus Eggman would have been so unfair anyways.
Exactly, yeah. Like, I think some people go back and, like, they go back to their favorite episodes, and I think when that happens, they're not as concerned about thinking, you know, oh, how did this episode compare to what came before or after? So I think Among Us versus Fall Guys might be one of those episodes where people will look back on it more fondly over time than they do now. You know, at some point, people aren't going to look at it as the episode that came after Bowser versus Eggman. They're going to look at it as, oh yeah, that episode, Among Us versus Fall Guys, that was pretty fun. So I hope people come around to this episode more. And again, I do know of instances where people were skeptical, but they did still enjoy the episode a lot. So, you know, I think that's great that Death Battle is able to do that, and that maybe people aren't as stubborn as maybe I make them out to be. So, you know, really happy about that. But okay, I think we've said everything that we want to say. Thank you guys so much for being on this episode. I really do appreciate it. I loved all of your insight for these episodes, and I want to hear what all of you guys listening has to say as well. So, you know, leave your own opinions down in the comments below. Say what you want to say. If you agree, disagree with anything that we've said, just be civil with each other. I know it's hard, but I believe in you. You can do it. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. The next episode, I believe, should be a solo review of Kratos versus Asura. Again, though, with all this scheduling, we don't really know exactly what's going to happen, so we'll see. But I hope to see you in the next episode, and that is a wrap. Have a good night.
Yippee! Yay.
Wait, you too?
Yeah.